All right, yes. So thank you so much for those that have just joined us, and as well those that have been waiting. Thank you so much for coming back on this evening. Thank you, Dr. Blackwood, as well, for joining us again today. It's always great to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. All righty then. I believe more people will join us shortly. In the meantime, I will make sure that you are the host. All right, everyone. So I know today we have Dr. Black who will be speaking about red flags, relationships that will either help or hurt your mental health. So what a great topic. I know there's a lot to touch upon as well. So we for sure cannot wait to hear your knowledge and share your experiences as well. So without further ado, Dr. Blackwood, take it away.
Thank you so much, Nicole. You're so good at this. You make me feel so good. I love it. I love coming here. I hope everybody's having a good week and a good day and a good evening. For those of you who are new to me, my name is Dr. Andrew Blackwood, also known as Coach Drew, and I am the Healing Communications Coach. And I trust by the end of the evening, you'll understand why I choose to call myself that. And before we dive in, there's going to be, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping. I'll talk to you and share a presentation for the first part, and then we'll have some questions at the end. The questions are my favorite part, right? Because I'm going to share some information with you that is meaningful, but it's also going to be somewhat general. So if you have specific questions, although what I will share with you will be based on some principles, and then you'll have to discern how to apply it. The questions are a real good opportunity for you to get some specific, more focused application of the principles that I'm talking about. So write your questions down and bring them up when we get to that point. The other thing to do is you have the ability to unmute yourself, and sometimes it happens accidentally. So just be aware of that. And if you happen to pop out and pop back in, just be intentional about keeping yourself muted. All right. So be comfortable using your chat. I love when people talk back to me. So yeah, if you can relate to something, throw it in the chat. If you think something really resonates with you, let me know. And we're just gonna go ahead and dive in. All right. Now let me make sure I am sharing my screen with you. Share screen. Yes, there we go. All right. Let's get in it. Tonight we are talking about red flags. Red flags. We're going to be talking about elements that happen in relationships that can hurt or help or hurt our mental health. Now, I want to make a disclaimer here, okay, right off the bat. One of these red flags in your life or in your relationship does not make someone an unsuitable partner. Okay, so you can allow that anxiety to come all the way down. Doesn't make you or your partner or somebody you're intending to be in relationship with an unsuitable partner. But as you will see, if there are many of these red flags, I'm only going to list 6 of them tonight. But if you have all 6 in your relationship or in your life, you will be able to see how it adds up. Okay. So it's really, really important. Whether you exhibit these red flags or you're in a relationship with someone or people, this could be family members, this could be people who are older than you, younger than you, this could be coworkers. It really, really doesn't matter. The goal here is to look at yourself, right? Because you can be a perpetrator of these things, or look at the people around you with the understanding that you can grow. That's the whole point. This is not to put a noose around someone's neck or to say that you suck as a person. That's not the case here, right? This is all about growth. You have a choice. We always have choices, and in some of our talks before, I'll reference some things. So you may want to go back to some of the previous videos or ask me a follow-up question. That's fine if I don't go in enough detail here, but awareness and choice, they are critical factors in our relationships as well as our mental health. Okay, awareness. And awareness is not just something that you come upon once. Awareness is a continual exploration. It's a way of reflecting that helps us to know what's going on beneath the surface, right? Some people say what you see is what you get, and that's true for some people, but only to a certain degree, because there's always room, I believe, for more growth. There's always stuff to look at. So the longer you've lived is the more stuff you've gone through, right? We've all got baggage. We've all got baggage. And if somebody doesn't think they have baggage, well, that could be a red flag too. But anyhow, we'll get there. So awareness is important. It's something we want to do and look at often. And then choice is also important. Okay. Choice is about options. Okay. It's about direction. It's about movement, momentum, how you invest your life. But your choices are subject to your awareness. Okay. You see this guy here in this picture. He's at a maze, and if you're going through life, sometimes life can be confusing, and if you don't realize that you have options, right, you may end up feeling stuck, right, or you may make the same choice over and over and over again because you don't realize you have another option. We want to be aware we have options. I've worked with so many people on the inside of abusive relationships, and a lot of the times they have this idea that they don't have a choice. Okay. When you're not aware that you have a choice, then you're most likely to make the same choices, even if that means I'm not going to go anywhere, I'm staying here. That's a choice, right? I started watching King Richard today. I haven't finished it yet, so don't worry, I'm not going to spoil the movie for you. But that's the Venus and Serena Williams story, and I was so moved to tears so many times in the movie. And at the core of it, this father had an awareness. He had a keen awareness of the potential for his daughters. I thought that was so beautiful, right? A lot of the times we are not aware even of the potential in ourselves, in our children, in our relationships. So we want to cultivate awareness, and that's what this entire talk tonight is all about. Now, if we don't see our worth, right, which is the biggest thing, um, in a couple weeks from now, we're going to get into the connection between mental health and self-esteem. We'll talk about it a little bit today at different points, but ultimately, we are all gifts. We are wonderful gifts. And if we're not aware of that, then we won't be able to live to our fullest potential. And that is what this is about, right? That's what we're talking about tonight. So, one of the reasons why we're not aware of our full potential a lot of the times, and I've worked with families for years, is comes down to sometimes our parenting. And I know I've got some parents on the call. I'm just going to assume that is the case. And I'm a parent too, right? So I'm not blaming you for the outcome of your children's lives. That's not what this is about, right? There's no such thing as a perfect parent, nor is there a perfect child. Nobody's perfect. However, one of the things that doesn't always come through in our parenting is this strong sense of self, a sense of self-esteem, of self-worth, right? And a lot of the times it's because we are so focused on loving our kids in other ways, providing for them, right? Going to work, teaching them good values. Yet all the people, I would dare say almost every person that I've worked with who has had a significant mental health challenge, their level of self-worth is really, really low. There's a direct correlation between our mental health and wellness and our self-value, right? And it's important that we're aware of that, because parents, they get the flack, they get the blame, but they also get the praise when the kids, do really, really well, right? That's because we have an opportunity like no one else. So if your children are young, or if they're teens, or if they're adults, we still have the opportunity to impact change in their perception of themselves, right? So we're going to talk about that. One of the reasons why I in my work and in my life, where I've seen that parents haven't emphasized this, is because it wasn't done for them, right? A lot of parents, they've come through, parenting, which was focused on other things, where they didn't really emphasize the value and the worthwhile um, nature of the person, right? Of that child. So it's not something that we were raised with or taught to do. And in some cases, another reason is we are taught not to praise people. We're taught not to big people up, or to encourage our kids to speak well of themselves. And the concern is that our children will become conceited or cocky, right? Or that's vain, right? Especially in, I come from a Christian background, and there's a lot of emphasis on vanity and pride. We don't want to engage in that. But there's a difference between confidence and conceit. Okay. Confidence is about knowing yourself, right? And knowing your capacity and feeling good about who God made you to be, like who you are. There's nothing wrong with that. Conceit is where you think that you are better than other people. Okay. Confidence, I know my value. Conceit, I know that I'm better than everybody else. I'm more valuable than other people. Very, very different. So we want to be intentional about acknowledging the good in our kids. And this red flag sometimes gets in the way of that. Okay. Let's dive in. We're going to talk about this first red flag. Mean, meanness, mean people. Okay. I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody who likes being around mean people. I don't even think mean people like being around themselves, because they're just mean. Okay. When I say mean, I mean someone who is unkind, overly critical, and judgmental. Okay. So if this is you, know that I love you and calling you out. Okay. And I can be like that sometimes too. I know if I've had very little sleep, or sometimes if I've eaten gluten, I do not behave like myself, right? I can be mean to myself. I can be overly critical and judgmental with myself. It's good to be aware of that, right? Because when it comes to how we are with ourselves, that usually spills over into how we are with other people. Not the strangers, right? Not the people at work, because we're usually kind to them. It's the people that are closest to us that get the best of us and the worst of us. Okay. So if you find yourself being unkind or overly critical and judgmental toward yourself or other people, I want you to pay attention to that. It's really, really important to pay attention to that, because it can have an impact on the other person's mental health and wellness. Okay. I was working with a gentleman, a senior, in fact, and he was very close to taking his life when we were working with each other. And there are many factors that contributed to that. But one of the themes dated all the way back to his childhood, where his mother, it's not just mothers, fathers, uncles, grandpas, people can be unkind, but his mother was mean and judgmental and critical. And it wasn't just one season of his life. She had been that way, right? Now, someone might think about this man and be like, he's a grown man, just disregard what people say. Well, that's a little bit judgmental too. But the point I'll make here is, when people don't appreciate the compound impact of communication, of interactions over time, then they really don't understand, right? When you think about, I was walking down the street, and I love being out in nature, and I'm walking and I'm walking on pavement. Okay. I'm walking on a paved road, and I see grass coming through. How does grass come through pavement? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. But if you really think about it, there was a seed that was planted. And over time, that seed worked its way through bit by bit by bit. And a lot of the times, hurtful seeds have been planted in our lives, and we may be strong on the outside, but eventually, if that's not addressed, it comes through, right? What happens to us matters. And if we don't resolve these things, if we don't adequately grieve, if we don't forgive, if we don't move through a process where we understand, oh, this is how that impacted me, and then I get to deal with this. This is an opportunity for me to deal with this. It can manifest in a number of ways. And one of those ways is being mean, right? So it's important to look at this because the way that we interact with other people can really impact our mental health and wellness, right? Now, I'll give you an example of a seed or something that is mean that can be planted. Um, because I really believe that anything that is said to us and repeated over and over and over actually becomes a belief. And remember, communication is not just the words that we say, right? That's the verbal part, that's the content. But then there is the nonverbal stuff, right? Nonverbal, that's the tone, that's the look on the face, like this dude's face right here. That's speaking volumes. He's like, what? You have a problem? Like, we could put so many words to this picture, right? And that's inevitably what happens, especially with children, especially with teens, sensitive people, right? If people who are aware, if they're paying attention to you, they might be misreading your face, but they're going to take that in. So if you tell somebody you're stupid over and over and over and over and over, once they might be, oh, that's mean. You're just being mean. Why would you say that? But twice, three times, 3,000 times, 5, 10 years of look on that face, right? When somebody makes a mistake, like, that's going to have an impact. If they're not challenging those thoughts, then that's going to go in. So we want to be aware and want to be intentional, because what we experience, we internalize as beliefs. We're not always aware of that, but it has an impact, right? All right, so let's move to the second red flag: negativity. Now, yes, mean people are usually negative, but I want to be a little bit more clear. When I say negative, I'm talking about someone who is hyper focused on the bad things. Okay, the glass is typically half empty with these people, right? It may be about themselves, right? They may look at themselves and only see the negative, right? I didn't get a chance to kind of do something with my beard tonight, so it's kind of, floating up and doing all sorts of weird stuff. But I still like it. It's me. It's an expression. I can see the good in it, even though there's something about it that I might not like. Some people are so focused on the negative things that it outshines the positive. And you can only imagine what it would be like to live with somebody who is focusing on the negative. And, use an example. And I know a lot of parents can relate to this because this happened to them. And then sometimes we do it to our kids. If they come home with a grade, and let's say they get an 83%, 83% is pretty decent, right? For some people, that's really good. And the immediate focus is the 17% that's missing. They could even get 99, and people be like, what happened to the 1%? Right? Like, when we often focus on the bad things, on the negative things, it has a negative impact, right? It really, really does. I don't know if you can relate to that. If you can relate to that, either put something in the chat. I can relate, right? Or send me a thumbs up or something. But this is not new for a lot of people. And I want to talk a little bit on two sides of this, right? One side is sometimes this happens not because the person is intending to be negative, right? They're actually wanting the person to improve. On some level, they know that this person has capacity and they want them to do better. But this strategy isn't the most effective strategy, right? When we focus on the negative, we focus on the problem actually tends to get bigger, right? The direction that we put our focus in, that's where the rest of us is going to go, right? That's where the momentum, that's where the energy goes. I was teaching my daughter how to ride her bike. And, she was so concerned about falling that she was just looking down, right? She's looking down, looking down. And you know what happens when you look down, right? All your momentum, your force, your weight, your balance is thrown off. And then of course you're gonna fall, right? The best way to move forward in your life is to literally keep your head up, right? Have a larger perspective. Look at where you want to go, and that's what we want to do as parents, as supporters, as boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, whatever your role is. If you want to be supportive and encouraging, focus on the good. Okay, focus on what they're doing well. Um, Another reason why people tend to focus on the negative, like I mentioned with my daughter, she was concerned about falling. A lot of people are concerned, right? And that concern isn't just based on the situation. They have a history of worry, right? They're so worried about this happening, that happening, that they're focused on, well, we don't want this to happen. Don't want this to happen. If you don't do this, if you do that. And then we cultivate this language and this way of parenting and being with people that actually produces anxiety, right? If you don't do this, then this is going to happen. Right there, you've planted a picture in their mind of what's going to happen. And if they are anxiety prone, that's what they're going to be thinking of. Okay. And I want to double back for a moment to talk a little bit about mental health and mental wellness. I intended to do this at the beginning as a brief recap, and I forgot to do it. So, for those of you who weren't at one of the original talks that we did about mental health, my definition of mental health, it acknowledges the fact that everyone has unique capacity, right? Everyone is made wonderfully different, right? So mental health and wellness is about having access to your own capacity to be the best version of yourself. So for me, it might look this way, and for somebody else, it might look this way, right? So the way that we parent, the way that we engage with people, it does impact their ability to access their best. And here's how it might get in the way. If we're negative all the time, or if we're mean to people, or we exhibit these other red flags, it's going to have an impact, right? People will kind of question themselves, right? They'll doubt themselves. They will lose sleep over it. They might even not eat well, right? They might not be able to apply themselves. And then there's this cascading effect. Ultimately, we end up creating beliefs about ourselves that are not true. And when we do that, we then live from this place of belief. We always live from a place of belief, whether we know it or not. But if we have negative beliefs about ourselves, then we live out these beliefs, right? I can't do this. I can't do that. This is never going to work. And, we worry about things, and then that worry turns into, anxiety, and then anxiety can often roll over into depression. So it's really, really important that we actually acknowledge the impact that we can have on other people and that other people can have on our lives. Okay. So we've covered being mean, and we covered being negative. Let's move on to being aggressive. Aggression is really, really important to pay attention to. And by aggression, I mean someone who's forceful. That might be physically or verbally. Okay. Um, Now, if anybody knows me, um, I've been working with people for a number of years, and I like to develop courses. And one of the courses that I made online is it's called Living Life the Assertive Way. And in it, I acknowledge that aggression is a form of communication, believe it or not. And we talk about the spectrum. So on the one end, there's aggression, right? And then on the other end is being passive, right? And where I believe it's best for us to live for the most part is in the middle, where we're assertive, right? Where we're clear, we're direct. Those are healthy communication principles. Clear, direct, open, honest, right? Um, we don't have to be aggressive, nor do we have to be passive. We want to be able to move along that spectrum of communication and expression with choice. That's the key here, because I don't want to convey that being aggressive is bad and it's always wrong, nor is being passive bad or always wrong. Being stuck on either end without the ability to move or choose, that's what's not healthy, right? Because if someone's threatening me or my child, right, chances are I'm going to move from being assertive to being more aggressive, especially if they're not taking the hint, right? Whereas on the other hand, if someone is, has a gun and says, "Give me your wallet," you better believe I'm going to give them my wallet. It doesn't matter that much to me, right? So that taking the path of least resistance in that moment, being more passive, being more compliant, that's not necessarily a bad thing. However, if we find that people are aggressive and that's where they usually are on that continuum, you want to pay attention to that. Even if they're not aggressive with you, okay? Even if they're not aggressive with you. I've worked with people in relationships and considering relationships. Um, and sometimes we give people a pass and we basically make excuses for them. Right? This is what they know. This is where they come. That's nice, right? But if you believe in growth like I do, people have options, right? And if that aggression isn't turned to you today, that doesn't mean it won't eventually. So be aware of that. And if you find yourself being aggressive, overreacting in situations, it's important to look at that, right? I was talking to a gentleman today, talking about blame in relationships. Blame only exists when people don't take responsibility for themselves. Blame is never helpful, right? In relationships, I don't believe in holding people accountable. Accountable. No, 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 no. That's not healthy. Holding people accountable, that's what prisons are for, that's what police are for. You'll hold people captive and to protect society. No, accountability is about something that you want for yourself. You want a degree of health in your relationship, then you get to choose that. You get to be accountable for the people that you are in a relationship with. We get to take that onus, right, on ourselves. We got to take responsibility for ourselves and get the help that we desire. Okay. So that is another red flag that I think is really important to pay attention to. While we're on the topic of that, because this can be, it's not as obvious, right? It would still be on that continuum of aggressive. Actually, this might be more passive aggressive. So in the middle, right? Healthy is assertive, but a combination of passivity and aggression gives you passive aggressive stuff. So this is when you're not um, directly addressing something. You're not being upfront. Okay. I'm going to come to the controlling in a moment, but passive aggressive, you might say something and you might not mean it, right? You might use sarcasm, right? There's something that bothers you, but you don't really address it, right? We can use that to convey something or create distance or move people or manipulate people, which is a form of being controlling, making people feel guilty, right? When they're not responsible, using guilt trips. All of these kinds of things are eventually exercises of control. And when someone doesn't allow others to make choices, that's what I consider controlling, right? It's controlling. If you do something to keep someone in relationship with you, that's controlling. If you do something to keep someone from doing something that they want to do, that's controlling. Now, let's talk about it from a parental point of view. We want to consider this in the appropriate age and stage of development. Okay, like I said before, everybody's going to be very different. You may have a 5-year-old that might be more mature than a 10-year-old. Okay, they may be ready for more decision-making opportunities, right? It's about maturity, it's about these things, but it's important to be aware of this. I'm a parent. I have a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old who I love very much. And I know that sometimes I can be worried because I don't believe they're always going to make the wise choice. That said, they will not develop the ability to make wise choices if I do not give them the opportunity to make wise choices. If they turn 15, 16, 17, 18, and I haven't allowed them to be home alone or allowed them to cook or allowed them to do all these other things, believe it or not, I might have tried to shelter them and do things for them, but I actually have not helped them any, right? So whether you're a parent or you're a partner, it's important to realize when you are being controlling. How do you feel about other people disagreeing with you? Can other people have their own say about things? That's important, right? That's really, really important. And if you have trouble with that, it's going to be important for you to look at, is this a compromise of my values or their safety, or what is this about, right? So we really, really want to pay close attention to that. Okay. Let's talk about this one, being closed. I love this picture here, closed for business. Um, this is a part that might not make a lot of sense to people, but in essence, this is about somebody who doesn't share about themselves. Okay. Somebody who doesn't allow you in. Okay. Somebody who is closed. If you think about relationships and communication, you want to think about the barriers, right? There's different degrees of access that you can have. You can be with somebody who's like a brick wall. There's no getting in, no getting out. There's no windows, no nothing. You can't see in, can't see. That's no way to live, right? And some people, it's like a broken down picket fence, a door with, that's it's just a frame. Anybody can come in, anybody out. Everybody knows all the business. Like the extremes, neither of them are good, right? But I want to talk a little bit about might what people might be experiencing that contribute to them being closed, right? So there's a difference between secrecy and privacy. Okay. Privacy is about trust. Okay. One of the really important healthy communication principles is openness. Okay. Openness and honesty. Those are two very important healthy communication principles. And they might sound the same, but they're actually quite different. I do believe it's important to be honest in our relationships. And then I also do believe that it's important to be open, but you get to choose how open you're going to be. Openness is about transparency, which is about trust. Honesty, that's just about truth. So some people find it difficult to walk that balance, and I get it. It can be very difficult. But the best thing to do is to really assess, okay, do I trust this person? Am I being reserved? Am I being closed? Am I not sharing for a particular reason or reasons? Right? If you don't trust this person and this person is giving you reason not to trust them, by all means, keep it private, right? If it's not appropriate for the relationship, that's fine, right? I'll give you an example. If somebody comes to the door and they knock on the door, I'm not going to let them into my house, into my kitchen, into my bedroom. No, there are degrees of closeness. I don't know you like that. You're going to stay out there, right? But if my wife comes to the door I would expect that she'd be allowed to come inside the house, right? Come inside the bedroom, right? Come inside my heart, come inside my life, because that's the context of our relationship, right? So if you know that somebody is not trustworthy, it doesn't make sense to be fully open and fully transparent. You can even be honest to say, you know what, when this and happened, I lost trust. So I really don't want to share all of these details with you at this point in time. You can be honest and not too open. When people are just brick wall all the time, it's telling you something, right? Everybody's got stuff, right? Sometimes people haven't resolved their stuff. So they're not going to go there. They're not able to, or at least they don't believe that they're able to. And they actually might not, because they might be worried and fearful of being overcome with the memories or the pain of whatever it is that they haven't shared with you, right? On some level, that's privacy, but then it's also secrecy because it's not healthy for them to keep it inside, right? Some people, they don't believe in getting support, right? They have this dialogue for themselves. I should be able to handle this, but they're not handling it. And like I said before, there's that seed. It's going to grow. It's going to come through eventually. Sometimes it comes through in the form of a mental breakdown, right? Sometimes it comes through in terms of them being mean and angry, being negative, and having these unrealistic expectations of other people because that's what they have for themselves. So if someone is closed, it doesn't mean that they're a bad person. In my estimation, it means they've got stuff to deal with and they might not have dealt with it yet. Okay. So we want to be aware of that. Some people might say, well, you know what? I can keep things to myself. They can keep things to themselves. Okay, that's great. However, there's a cycle of intimacy and vulnerability. Okay. If you are going to be in a meaningful long-term relationship, and this applies to parents and children, siblings, whatever, significant others, it's important for people to know you and for you to know them, right? You can only be as intimate. And by intimate, I don't necessarily mean physically affectionate or sexual or anything like that. I'm talking about knowing someone, belonging to somebody. Belonging is one of the most important aspects of humanity. We are relational beings. We need to be in relationship with other people. We need to know that we matter. We need to know that we have value and that we are part of community. That is essential. We have family, we have people who love us. And how do we know that people love us? That they accept us, not just the good parts or the parts that are the same as them, but the parts that we don't think are so great, right? You don't have to be perfect to be wonderful. But if you don't share those imperfections with other people, there's always going to be this tentativeness. I don't know if they really like me or if they really accept me, right? So if you're not vulnerable to be transparent, then you can never really be fully known or fully accepted. Excuse me. And that's why being closed or with somebody who's very closed makes it difficult to be in a relationship, right? And it's not healthy for them and it's not healthy for us. Okay. And if you have questions about this later on, we'll come back to it. But I really wanted to stop here for a moment. Because even for parents who've gone through so much, so many times I've seen this happen, a transgenerational process happens where a parent has gone through something and that's the last thing they want for their child. That's the last thing they want for their grandchild. But they wall it off in a way that they think, I'm just going to keep this in the vault. We'll never talk about it. But it comes out in interesting ways, right? Let's take the case of a trauma. A lot of the times when people have gone through trauma, even sexual assault or things of that nature, yes, who wants to talk about that? I don't know anybody who wants to talk about it. Or let me put it this way, it doesn't feel good to talk about that. But sometimes you've seen generational patterns happen because we didn't talk about it. We didn't let our children know that this can happen, right? Or the other extreme is we protect them so much that we don't trust them. We don't cultivate a sense of awareness. Then they get to the point where they're like, I want to do what I want to do. And then the same pattern can happen, right? So it's important that we take the time to take care of ourselves enough to heal so that we can be open and transparent when the time comes. Okay. Let's talk about this. In my early days of working with people, I did a lot of work with teens, and we know that teenage years are the years where people experiment and they do all sorts of things, and some people never really grow out of that. That's another discussion. But when I would tell these young people, like, if somebody's using substances, this is a red flag, and they had a hard time making that connection because so many people use. But here's the distinction: there's a difference between use and dependence. Okay, someone who copes with a substance, and by substance I mean weed, alcohol, but you can substitute anything else: sex, money, violence. All of these things can become coping strategies that we use, right? As opposed to dealing with our stuff. Coping is not growing. Okay. There's a young man that I worked with many, many years ago who changed my rigid opinion about marijuana. I do not, I do not like marijuana. I do not like the way it smells. I like nothing about it. Nothing about it. Um, but there was this young man who had these breathtaking migraines. He had been to doctors for years, and nothing helped. Tylenol, that stuff did nothing for him. The only thing that helped was smoking marijuana. Now, was he using it to cope? Yes. Was he using it to avoid life? No. This young man wanted to work, but he couldn't. He wanted to do his homework, but he couldn't. He wanted to engage. He wanted to do different things in his life, but he couldn't because he was in so much pain, right? So I'm not talking about all or nothing here. What I am talking about is awareness and being intentional. So when we cope with things, that doesn't help us to grow through things. We're not dealing with things. So if somebody is using, whether it's you or somebody else, it's important to recognize that, because we're not building the skills that we need for the next level of life. It's important. There's a difference between feeling stress and relieving our stress. But if there's a dynamic in your life that's creating stress and you don't really address that, then that cycle is going to continue. That stress is not going to go away. In fact, it's going to get worse. It's going to build on itself and build on itself, and you're not getting any better at dealing with the situation, right? Or changing the situation. So someone who copes with substances as opposed to growing through them, they are not going to be able to be a support system to themselves as effectively as they could be, in my estimation, had they learned how to deal with this and access those strengths that I believe that they do have. Is it easy? No, not necessarily. Is it doable? I would like to believe so, because the alternative is depressing, right? So these are the six flags that I want to talk about today. And I want to be very clear about the alternatives. Okay. As opposed to being mean, be kind. It's really that simple. Sometimes it's work, right? If you're having trouble being kind, then talk to me about it. Let me know. I have a resource that I can share with you, right? One of the most important things about communication is understanding, right? Comprehending, but also being understanding, being able to provide empathy. And if you're not very good at doing that, then the people in your lives are not getting the best of you. And there are reasons for that. And we want to be able to do that. We want to be able to be kind. We want to be able to be patient and loving and long suffering and all those wonderful things. That's how we want to be, right? Instead of being negative or focusing on the negative, we want to focus on the good. We want to focus on the positive, right? We want to keep our head up in every sense, right? We want to look for the good and be intentional about vocalizing that. okay? Instead of being aggressive, being stuck being aggressive, or even too passive, we want to be able to be assertive, okay? And there are ways to do that, to be able to be direct, to be open, to be honest, to be clear. There's ways to do that. 4, instead of being controlling, allow others to make their choices. It's that simple, right? Of course, you want to put it in context, right? We want people to be safe as best as possible. And we want to really pay attention to their developmental stages, okay? Number 5, as opposed to being closed, right? Not being able to be transparent and open, we want to be able to cultivate healthy openness, okay? And lastly, as opposed to coping with things, whatever it is, we want to be committed to growth. Every single day, there are opportunities for us to grow. We want to be intentional about that. All right. So now we are going to go into a time of questions. So while I was doing this presentation, I didn't have a chance to look at the chat. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So if you haven't put your questions in, now would be a great time to do that. Or you're welcome to raise your hand and I will try to get to it. Yes, somebody said it's a great movie. Yes, King Richard, I'm loving it. I might just finish the rest of it tonight. We'll see. All right. Any questions? Please let me know. Now, what I'm going to do is look through to see if I see any hands. So I see a hand, and I'm not sure if this hand is up on purpose. So I've just asked you to unmute. If you have a question there, you're welcome to unmute yourself and let me know. How many red flags are too much to look past? Very, very good question. Or is one too many? Yeah, I would definitely say it's not about the number. It's about the significance of these things. That's number one. Because if it's intense, if it's constant, if it's you know perpetual, that's something to pay attention because what could be just one flag. Um, if everybody could mute their mics for a moment, that'd be great. Yeah, so it's less about the number and it's more about the impact. That's one thing to be considering. If all of the flags are there, yeah, it's going to add up as well. But one of the things, because what do you do after you find a red flag or you recognize a red flag? We really want to support people to have the freedom to look at their stuff, right? We want to inquire, are they aware of this? Do they see it the same way? If they don't, then that can be problematic, right? If they do, the next question is, okay, well, are you going to take ownership of that? Are you going to do something about it? So that's even more important than the red flag itself, because people, nobody's perfect. People can grow. This is one of the most important elements, I believe, that you want to look for if you're looking for a partner or you want to cultivate in yourself. It is this desire for growth, an openness for growth, and a desire for growth, because people can change, right? But if you don't want to grow, if you don't believe you can grow, then those red flags are going to stay right where they are. Okay, so again, really good question. More important than the number of flags is the intensity, the frequency, and ultimately the other person's awareness of them and their commitment to seek change. Okay. All right.
I have a
Okay.
question.
Okay, go ahead. Tell me your name
Yeah,
and then your question.
yeah, my name is Evelyn. My question is, what if you have I'm going to use a family as an example. In a family, you have someone who has this one of these red flags, say, for example, aggression, and the person is always being aggressive, and the person is not aware, but you are aware that the person is being aggressive, and you're trying to let the person know that the person is aggressive and the person doesn't even agree with you. How do you handle such situation?
Yes. So, very good question. How do you handle a situation if the person is being aggressive and you brought it to their attention, but they don't see it the same way? Number one, I think safety is important. We always want to be safe for ourselves and consider safety for the other person. So if the person is being aggressive physically and you're in danger, whether or not they see it that way or not, it's important for you to take care of yourself. If you're not physically in danger, it doesn't mean that damage isn't being done. But one of the ways to address it from my perspective is first you want to be very specific, right? You want to be very specific about what they're doing, what they're saying, how they're doing it, how they're saying it, and the impact that it's having on you. Because what we want to do is see if they have the ability to appreciate your perspective, right? So, because what we ultimately want to do is we want to cultivate empathy in other people. And one of the best ways to do it, if they acknowledge that this thing happened and they don't appreciate your perspective, then it's a really simple question, but you can ask, has this ever happened to you? Has anyone ever treated you that way? And you're going to get a lot of good insight from that, because they might say no, so they don't know what it feels like. Or they might say, yeah, it happens all the time. And they might consider that a normal way of life being for them, right? If they haven't experienced it, then you can ask them, well, how do you think it would feel if that were happened to you, right? And sometimes they don't answer that question right away, or they might answer it superficially, but that question can sit with people, right? I was talking to someone today, and that's the approach that she used, right? She didn't make a big deal out of something. She just highlighted, you know what, this is how that felt for me. And the next morning, she received two apologies, right? So that's what I would say. If you are safe enough to engage with this person, I would seek to support cultivating of empathy, because that's really where we want to see change. It's a great question. Thank you, Evelyn. Um, Let me go to the chat
Thank
if
you.
there's not another question. You're so welcome. I received this question. Okay, thank you. Great discussions. They would like to add another flag to these major six: lies and unfaithfulness, especially in dealing with partners. Oh boy, you gotta open it up. Yeah, I do think that is an important one. Yes, I think it's worthy of adding that. Okay, I will definitely add that. Um, so I, lies. How do we deal with lies? Um, Similar to that piece about aggression, I think it's important to acknowledge, right, or see if the person will acknowledge whether or not they're being truthful about things. And if you find that they're not, yes, that's a big red flag. It's a big red flag. Sometimes we don't see these this one in particular, because some people are really good at hiding the truth. So if you do see it, it's good to call people on it. It's good to call people on it where it's safe to do so, of course. But yeah, I definitely think that's a good one. If you have more specific questions around that, please let me know. Um, all right, what if both people in the relationship have red flags? How do you go about having a constructive conversation with each other? Very good question. And I think that is most likely the case with everyone, because nobody's perfect. Um, and I think I mentioned this earlier. Two things. One is endorsing or investing in growth, right? When we take responsibility for ourselves and we look at how we can grow, then we're less likely to point the finger at somebody else. We want to cultivate that. And you get to do that. Each individual gets to do that by looking at themselves first. You model that. And what you end up doing is creating a culture of that, right? So even when I encourage people to address hope and I give them coaching around that, one of the things that I encourage them to do is start with forgiveness. That's really, really important. And forgiveness is something we talked about earlier, but a lot of people think forgiveness means whatever you do is okay, and I'm just gonna move past it. That's not what forgiveness is, right? So when we forgive people, then that gives us room to look at not only what they've done, but also to look at ourselves. We can forgive ourselves and we can approach a conversation. So say, this is where I went wrong. This is what I'm going to do differently. And then you can ask, is there something that you are wanting to do differently? Right? Then you can be accountable to the other person, right? You can say, this is what I'm going to do to work on this and this and that. What about you? And we can be accountable to and with each other, right? So it's a very good question. Being open, being honest, being truthful, right? Taking initiative for change is really the only way to grow. It's one thing to say, yeah, I did that. But it's another thing to say, yeah, I did that. I'm going to look into understanding why I did that. Why have I done that? What are the contributing factors? And I'm going to see how I can change that. Okay. So yeah, I think that those are a couple things that will help to make the conversation constructive, taking ownership, looking at change, and committing to a process, right? And I know sometimes it's daunting to look at oneself. They're not sure about, where do I go from here? Well, that's where you can get support, or you can read a book, you can look up some articles, you can have discussions about it, you can pray about it. There are a lot of things that we can do to help ourselves to grow. All right, really great question. um in my words, define controlling in a relationship. Well, it can be subtle, or it can be very overt, right? There's so many ways that one subtle way is you can demean someone's sense of judgment. Oh, I don't think that's a good choice. Oh, you always make these rash decisions. What's up with you? Insults, put downs. Um, those are ways that you can diminish someone's self confidence and downplay their decision making capacity so that they're more reliant on you. That's a form of control. Or what, people have been in situations where they're financially controlled, where they haven't been allowed to work, and then they don't get an equal say in how the money is invested. Right, so that can be controlling. Or you can't go here, you can't do that. Oh, you shouldn't don't talk to that person. That person does this, that person. There's so many different ways of how people can be controlling in a relationship. um yeah, so I hope those examples are clear. um, Another question, and I see there's a hand raised. I'll get to it right after this question. What if the person you raised the issue of aggression with says it's all in your mind and sees nothing wrong with her behavior or attitude? Um, well, you get to decide whether or not you agree with them. And there are a number of ways to do that, which is why it's good to be very specific and very clear, right? When this happened on this date, right, this actually did happen. And a lot of the times there are witnesses for these things. These things don't just happen in private. Okay, so I'm not saying get other people involved in your business, but I do think it's important to have community, right? It's important to have community so that if other people are witnessing these things, that we can get a sense from them. Okay, um, this is how it, did you see this happen, right? I just want to make sure that I'm clear about that. Um, and then ultimately, you can't control people. You can't force someone to see things your way, right? We don't want to seek to control people. but we do want to be aware that our choices and our decisions, they impact people. They have an influence on people. So if somebody um, is not being a safe person or a caring person or a kind person, you really don't have to engage with them, right? You don't have to engage with them. All right. So when we create those boundaries, it makes a difference to people, right? They if you're not there, if you're not around for them to be mean to, they might wake up and say, okay, um, maybe there is something to this, right? Or you can even ask them to ask somebody else, you know, that that they just get their perspective. Maybe somebody that you know in common that is a safe person that you both agree that we trust this person. You could ask their opinion, right? Um, I see a hand up, so I'm going to ask this person to unmute. I'm not sure if that hand is up accidentally. Um, okay. Okay, it's just okay. Maybe I'll ask them to lower the hand. Um, okay, another question came in. All right, I believe this is you, Pastor Francis. Does controlling does controlling behavior have spiritual connections? Um, well, yes. My understanding of spiritual connections is growing. So I think there's always a spiritual connection, right? I know that there are transgenerational patterns. They may look like just behavioral things, but they're passed from one generation to the next. People might call them curses, some people call them patterns or whatnot. I believe it's all spiritual. Everything that's spiritual, it manifests in a temporal form, right? So just because somebody is punching somebody doesn't mean that there's not a spiritual root to it, right? So spiritual might mean intangible or invisible, but at some point it's going to have a physical, temporal expression, right? So I definitely think there are spiritual roots to it. And it can manifest in very different ways, right? It can manifest in a belief system, right? People are always going to treat me this way. So, you know what? I'm going to just take care of myself, right? I have to do things on my own. No, it's going to go my way because if I, right, it can look like that. It can come into a mindset, right? It can manifest in relationships. And that's how I've seen it happen a lot of the times. Um, Sometimes there's a lack of awareness. Okay. A lot of the things that I believe happen in our lives, it's because there's a lack of awareness, and specifically, not just awareness of a spiritual influence, but an awareness of authority that we have as individuals, right? We're not aware that we have the power to change, right? Not every thought that comes into our minds, number one, is our own thought or coming from us. I do believe spiritual influences, thoughts can be impressed on us. Um, but regardless of whether the thought is mine or it's other, we have the option to choose how we respond to that thought. It's cultivating that awareness because we get to choose, do I agree with this thought? Will I endorse this thought? Because that thought is eventually going to either come out of our mouths or go deeper and become a belief, and it's we're going to live it out, right? So many times people are in significant internal conflict, right? Because we have contrasting beliefs and we don't know what to do. We don't know which belief to go with, right? So that's why I think as concrete and practical as journaling is, it is also a very spiritual practice because you're cultivating an awareness, right? You're thinking about this. This doesn't agree with my value system, or this doesn't have a, or my, this doesn't agree with God's word or call for my life. Where is this coming from, right? I actually have the authority to choose, but if I'm not making an intentional choice based on awareness, then I'm led down a particular road that I might not even want to go down, right? I believe that we're all called and created wonderfully for wonderful things, for good things. But sometimes we don't access those good things because of beliefs. and belief systems that we are not really aware of. So we're not intentionally, cultivating or safeguarding, right? Those are opportunities that we might miss out on. So another question here, if the person doesn't want to forgive and keeps on arguing that they're right, where do you go from there? How do you deal with that? Um, well, it really does take two to have an argument for the most part, right? We ultimately do have a choice. We can't force people to do things. I heard a saying and I love it, someone convinced against their will is still, or is of the same opinion still, right? If they don't own a change, no matter what you say, no matter what you do, that other opinion is going to come back to the surface, right? So if the person doesn't want to forgive, um, and keeps on going, keeps on arguing, um, I think it's good to look at your definition of forgiveness as well, because sometimes people do not let things go because it's not resolved for them, right? That's one situation, which is why I talk about in my book, The Art of a Genuine Apology. Sometimes people apologize and they think it's good enough. Why don't you just forgive me? But if you really understand what makes an apology not just sincere, but effective and meaningful for the other person, then you might be able to say, oh, right, this is what's missing. An example would be, if you say that you're sorry for a situation that happened, um, and you're ready to move past it, but the person isn't, it's good to ask, what's making it difficult for you to move past this, right? Asking questions, being open to the dialogue, just telling them to forgive. If their understanding of forgiveness is just let bygones be bygones, forgive and forget, then they're most likely going to not be open to doing that. They might want something from you. They might want you to know exactly the impact that that had on them. So you can ask them, how did this impact you? Right? Because I see this keeps coming up. Is there something that I can do that will address that? Right? Sometimes it might be you conveying that you have an understanding of how it impacted them. Right? So we have a few minutes, so I'll go into it. I'll review it. It may be new for some of you, but when we talk about healing emotional wounds and injuries and relationships, I believe it's really helpful to use the art of a genuine apology. Now, an apology is not just saying I'm sorry. A genuine apology actually really seeks the other person's healing. Okay. There are 5 values that are woven into a genuine apology. Okay. Um, one of those values is empathy, humility. Okay, I'll list all 5. There's empathy, humility, vulnerability, responsibility, and accountability. And the part that I want to emphasize right now is when we apologize, we want to be humble, right? We want to acknowledge and list, right, the specific things that we did that was hurtful to this person. It actually matters, right? We don't want to offer a general apology. When we list the specifics, we're not only being humble, but we're actually demonstrating taking responsibility, and that matters. I'm spelling out an acronym here. It's the acronym is LIVE. You want to apologize so that your apology lives on long after you've offered it. So L is list specific thing that you want to apologize for. The I, that's where you imagine the impact. This is where the value of empathy comes out. When you think about your actions and how it impacted that person, it created a feeling for them. They had an experience. And we want to label that. You know what? When I said this, when I did this to you in front of all these people, in front of your friends, you felt, I can imagine you felt embarrassed, right? You weren't just angry with me. You felt embarrassed. You felt humiliated, right? You had to, now you had to endure all your friends laughing at you, whatever it is. You want to imagine how they felt and you want to label that emotion, because until people know that you're aware of how you impacted them, they're not going to feel a sense of resolve with you, right? They might be able to heal on their own, but they're not going to heal with you if you don't express an acknowledgement and appreciation of their experience, because that's what's going to help you to start to rebuild uh, um, credibility, right? When there's emotional hurt, there's a loss of trust. You cannot have a healthy relationship without trust, right? Trust is like, when trust is broken, it's like your leg being broken. Like, how are you going to walk? How are you going to move forward? You're not going to be able to move forward at full strength with a broken leg. That's not how it works. So, what we want to do is, when we take responsibility, we want to think to ourselves, what moved me to do this? How did I end up in this position? What moved me to say that? And we're not looking at what the other person did. We're looking at the parts that we would want to do differently. So if I yelled at my child, I don't only look at what the child did. I want to look at me. What contributed to me yelling? So I can say, okay, this is what I'm going to do different the next time. That's the V. You want to verbalize a commitment to a plan of action. If you don't know how you came to do what you did, chances are you're going to do it again. And chances are you probably have done this thing over more than once, which is why the person's complaining about it over and over and over again. Right. So it's good for us to look at ourselves and say, okay, yeah, this is something I want to work on. This is what contributed to that. And then you share the plan. You don't share the reason, you don't share the explanation. That's for you, so that you can create a plan. What you want to share is the plan, because people, most for the most part, they don't care about the reasons, because it's going to sound like an excuse. But you want to share the plan. This is what I'm going to do to avoid that happening as best as possible. And then the last thing, right? Because V, where you verbalize a commitment to a plan of action, that talks about accountability, right? And it talks about responsibility. But the last letter, E, is where you extend an invitation for them to give you feedback. An apology is a dialogue. Okay, it's not a one-way offering, it's a dialogue. It goes back and forth. And E, you want to extend an invitation for them to talk to you about your apology. Did I miss anything? I want to make sure I get this right, right? Because I don't want this to happen again. I don't want you to feel the way that you do, right? You want to be open and vulnerable. Okay. We talked about vulnerability a couple times, openness, honesty. Well, this is another example. You want to be open to their honesty and their feedback. It's not easy to take this step, but that's a major part of reconciliation, right? It's important for there to be agreement about how we move forward, not just what we do, but how we, in a spiritual sense, do we have an agreement, right? Is there a sense of commitment? How are we going to move forward? That's really, really important. So when people are hesitant to forgive, it's important that we understand their hurt and appreciate their process, and not just assume that, well, it should be easy. It wasn't that big of a deal, because that might be part of the injury as well, right? So there's a saying that kids will be kids, but should I be more concerned about my child's temper tantrums, or should I brush it off? Oh, I would say address it, yes. We never want to brush it off, right? There is a strategy called non-attention. Sometimes kids are throwing a temper tantrum because they want attention. And sometimes it's more effective to not give them the attention in that moment. You can send them a clear message to say, you know what, this is not the best behavior. If you want to do this, come and talk to me about it. If they're in a safe place, by all means, leave them there. Let them roll on the ground. That's a strategy, right? Um, but sometimes kids haven't developed the language to be able to talk about what they're feeling and what's going on for them. We actually want to be able to listen to them, right? We want to be able to give them the words, give them the opportunity. That's really, really important, because sometimes they can have a meltdown because they're tired or they're really frustrated, right? Sometimes a loving response actually soothes that child, and a temper tantrum turns into something else. So there are different ways to approach it, but I would never say brush it off. Sometimes we get to take a break for ourselves, right? So we don't respond or react in anger. So we want to be able to do that for ourselves. But that's not brushing it off, right? I hope that helps and it is clear. So thank you for all your questions. We'll wrap it up here. I'll hand over to you, Nicole or Rachel. But thanks for your time and your attention, everybody.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Dr. Blackwood, again, for
You're so
sharing your
welcome.
great knowledge and expertise. I know as well, from previous questions that we've had, people have been wondering where they can watch these amazing workshops because they are recorded. So we have attached our YouTube channel link in the chat, where you will be able to access all the previous videos that Dr. Blackwood has been so kindly enough to really be here to really share his experiences and knowledge. So for those of you who were not able to attend today, this recorded session will also be posted tomorrow. So you will be able to view it then, and you can also share it to all those that weren't able to participate today. Other than that, we do have another workshop with Dr. Blackwood on Wednesday, June 29th at the same time from 5:30 to 7 o'clock. So we are looking forward to that. Again, anytime, we are super happy to have Dr. Blackwood here, being able to share again his knowledge. So other than that, feel free to reach out to us in regards to any questions or concerns. And if any of you also want to get into contact with Dr. Blackwood, please, please, please reach out to us first with your name and your email as well as your phone number. That way we can be able to direct you to Dr. Blackwood. I think that's just the most easiest way as well. And other than that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and God bless you all. Thank you, Dr. Blackwood, for being here once again.